Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 222 of the podcast. And on this episode of the podcast, I am talking about quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo agreeing to stay with the San Francisco 49ers and be their backup quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo has long been rumored to be on the way out of San Francisco. For the moment, though, it seems like that's not the case, as Garoppolo has agreed to a 1-year, $6.5 million deal to remain the team's backup quarterback. No current quarterback in the entire NFL has had a stranger career than Jimmy Garoppolo. In 2014, the 30-year-old was drafted in the second round by the New England Patriots, 62nd overall, with the idea being that at some point he would be the replacement to Tom Brady, who is at that point 37. In 3 seasons in New England, Garoppolo threw only 5 touchdowns and made 2 interceptions. Despite that, there was hype around the young quarterback, and with Brady going nowhere, the team traded Jimmy G to the San Francisco 49ers for a second-round draft pick. And after winning his first 5 starts with the Niners, the team gave Garoppolo a massive contract, a 5-year, $137.5 million deal, $90 million of which was fully guaranteed in the first 3 years of the deal, at the time of which was the most in NFL history. In 5 seasons with the Niners, Garoppolo has thrown 66 touchdowns and 38 picks and has a 67 completion percentage. He brought the team to the Super Bowl during the 2019 season, and last year brought the team to the NFC Championship game. So you might be asking yourself, why exactly is the team moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo? A lot of this has to do with injury. In 3 of the 5 seasons with the team, he's played in less than half of the team's games due to injuries. When he does play, he wins a lot, but that's not enough. I think this is something that doesn't get talked about when we talk about the best quarterbacks of all time. Those guys don't miss games. Tom Brady didn't miss games. He missed an entire season due to a fatal injury, but for the most part, Tom Brady does not miss starts. Brett Favre does not miss games. Peyton Manning did not miss games. The best quarterbacks in the NFL do not miss time. Aaron Rodgers is going to be there no matter what. Name any great quarterback and I'll probably tell you that guy didn't miss a lot of games. The NFL is not like Major League Baseball. It's not like the NBA. There's not 82 or 162 games. You need your players to play in all 16 games. You need to know that you can depend on that guy. And with Jimmy Garoppolo, there's not that dependability. You don't know when he's going to be healthy, and I know that's not a fair criticism. It's not Garoppolo's fault. I think that he gets hurt a lot. Last year, the Niners drafted quarterback Trey Lance 3rd overall and traded 2 first-round picks to take him. Last year, he sat out, but when you draft a player that high, eventually you need to give him a chance to be your franchise quarterback. One of the issues the 49ers on paper are a Super Bowl contending team. They have one of the best receivers in the NFL, in my opinion, Deebo Samuels, and an elite tight end in George Kittle, and defensive end Nick Bosa, who last year led the NFL with 15.5 sacks. That puts a lot of pressure on a younger quarterback like Trey Lance. A lot of people think right now that the 49ers can win more games with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback than they can with Trey Lance. That has nothing to say about Trey Lance's future, but right now, I think most people would say Jimmy Garoppolo is more capable of leading a team to a Super Bowl because he has. Having a super young quarterback in the NFL, like it or not, is like a rebuild. Young quarterbacks do not win in the National Football League, especially in their first year. It's super rare. Trey Lance is not going to come out on fire. I don't expect to see that. Patrick Mahomes threw 50 touchdowns and won an MVP in his second season. I just don't see that happening for Trey Lance. It's just so rare. When you put in that young quarterback, you expect to take a step back as a team because you're going to go through the growing pains with your young quarterback. It feels like from the outside looking in that the team was surprised that they made the NFC Championship game with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think they thought last year was going to end with a first round loss and would be easy to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. It is hard to move on from a quarterback who can bring you to the NFC title game. Because like it or not, the player who gets the most amount of praise for your team doing well is the quarterback. So when the team is really good, guess who's going to get the credit? Jimmy Garoppolo. I think there are a lot of people out there that look at Jimmy Garoppolo and say he's a winner. He's the reason that team went to the Super Bowl. He's the reason that team went to the NFC title game. And then there are other people who look at him as a game manager and think, oh, the only reason that team went to the Super Bowl is because that team is stacked and that Jimmy Garoppolo was only there for the ride. Now you're going to put in this young quarterback who you think is a lot better than Jimmy Garoppolo, and he better get better results, or you're going to say to yourself, wow, that Jimmy Garoppolo actually is a good quarterback. That's what's so interesting about this situation. We are going to see just how vital Jimmy Garoppolo is to the San Francisco 49ers. I just think it's a dangerous game to play in the NFL when you say a certain team can win with whoever is at the quarterback position. I mean, I grew up for years hearing that the Patriots could win with no matter who the quarterback is. Well, they had Cam Newton and they didn't do a lot of winning. Like, I'm not saying Jimmy Garoppolo is Tom Brady. I am saying I'm not so sure a young quarterback like Trey Lance, no matter how good he is, can come into this place and win a Super Bowl with this team that a lot of people think should at least get back to an NFC Championship game. This gets me to my next point. The other reason the Niners are moving off of Jimmy G is because of his lack of impressive stats and athleticism. Jimmy has never thrown 30 touchdowns in a single season, and he's an old school pocket passer. In theory, Trey Lance gives the team a new dimension, a running quarterback. In a way, this situation feels like history repeating itself because it's exactly what happened to Alex Smith when he was with San Francisco. He was a really good quarterback, brought them to within a game of the Super Bowl, but they moved on with Colin Kaepernick and traded Smith to the Chiefs. And then Smith was ultimately replaced by Patrick Mahomes. Those two cases worked out for both of those teams. Colin Kaepernick brought the 49ers to the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes has become the best quarterback in the entire NFL. And the 49ers are banking on the fact that the exact same thing is going to happen with Trey Lance. And I think that's a big bet to have. Like, that's asking an awful lot of a younger quarterback. What Alex Smith and Jimmy Garoppolo show by being replaced, that winning games isn't enough to be a team's long-term franchise quarterback anymore. You have to put up major stats. And Jimmy G and Alex Smith just don't. And what I find funny is, if Jimmy G put up great stats and didn't win, the Niners would probably keep him at quarterback. Look at Kirk Cousins, who puts up impressive stats. 3 years with 30 or more touchdowns, 6 seasons with 4,000 plus passing yards, but he never wins big games. But the Vikings continue to play him at quarterback, and there's no talk of the Vikings moving on from him. He doesn't win football games. Isn't winning football games what matters most in the NFL? But it seems like the teams value the stats way more than the actual winning. I do believe the NFL and the teams in it have become obsessed with stats and having quarterbacks win MVPs because the quarterback becomes the face of your franchise. And if your quarterback is not a top 10 quarterback, then you're not really viewed as a top 10 NFL franchise. If you don't believe me, just look at what the Cleveland Browns are enduring just to have Deshaun Watson. That's how desperate they are are to have a long-term franchise quarterback, to have a guy that's viewed as a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. They weren't willing to carry on with an average to below average quarterback in Baker Mayfield, who I think is a lot worse than a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, by the way. My point is, we are so quick to dismiss a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo because he doesn't throw 35 touchdowns a season, because he doesn't throw 4,000 passing yards, because there's no way he's ever going to win an MVP. But you know what he's going to do that some of these stat stuffers don't? He actually wins football games. Jimmy Garoppolo has been to a Super Bowl. Phillip Rivers, who we all love because he puts up the stats, has never been to the Super Bowl. If you want to have longevity as a franchise starting quarterback for an organization in today's game, you gotta put up those ridiculous stats. Even if you're not winning a lot of games, you're going to keep your job. I just find that to be kind of ridiculous, don't you? I would be fine with the San Francisco 49ers moving on from Jimmy because he's paid too much money or the injuries, but to keep him as the backup is such a bad idea. He's been to a Super Bowl and another NFC title game with the team. The minute Trey Lance struggles, Niner fans will demand to see Jimmy play because they're used to him winning football games. You should never in any circumstance have a backup quarterback who is more famous and popular than your starting quarterback. Have we learned nothing from numerous examples of this not working out? Mark Sanchez and Tim Tebow. This never works out. Never have your backup be a bigger name than your actual starting quarterback. I think that is a big rule that all NFL teams should follow. Like, it doesn't matter who Tom Brady's backup is because he's Tom Brady. It doesn't matter who Josh Allen's backup quarterback is, but it does matter who is the backup of Trey Lance, because if the Niners start 0-3, 49ers fans will go, well, we'd be 3-0 if Jimmy G were our starting quarterback. Right or wrong, that's how the situation is going to be viewed. This feels like an unwinnable situation, having a backup quarterback who has brought your team to a Super Bowl. That cannot happen in today's NFL. The other bizarre thing about this situation is the relationship between Jimmy and 49ers head coach Kyle Shanahan. It feels like Shanahan can't commit to Jimmy or quit him either at the same time. I think very highly of Shanahan as a head coach, but the way he's handled the quarterback position has been odd to say the least. He feels like the type of head coach who will never fully commit to any long-term franchise quarterback, and at the end of his tenure with the team, the Niners will probably have had multiple different starting quarterbacks. Shanahan called bringing Jimmy Garoppolo back a win-win situation for the franchise because they get to keep him at a lower cost. So you actually do value Jimmy Garoppolo, or don't you? Like, I just don't understand how Shanahan and the team actually feel about Jimmy Garoppolo as a player. I honestly want to know, do they want to move on from him because of his injury issues, or do they want to move on from him because they don't think he's a long-term franchise quarterback? I want to know the truth about the situation, and I feel like we're not getting that right now. I really think that's the most fascinating thing about Jimmy Garoppolo as a player in the NFL. There's no consensus view of him. Is he a winner? Is he a guy who should be way better than he is right now? Should he have been the guy who replaced Tom Brady? There are Patriots fans today who are still very upset over the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo is not the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, and the other side who will tell you he's nothing special. And you can make an argument for either side because there's very little on his resume. He's played so little NFL games. I know he's been to a Super Bowl, I know he's been to an NFC title game, but you can still say, I really don't know what Jimmy Garoppolo is as a long-term franchise quarterback because he hasn't done it consistently 4 or 5 years in a row. There have been flashes of really good good play. There have been flashes of really bad play. The honest truth is we really don't know what Jimmy Garoppolo is as a quarterback. We don't have enough of a sample size to say this is who he is and he's never going to get better and he's never going to get worse. I think that's the feeling around the league and around fans, is that what Jimmy Garoppolo is right now is what Jimmy Garoppolo will be. But if you look at his career, that's never been the case. Whatever you think Jimmy Garoppolo is, he always turns into something else. Like, we all thought he was going to be the next quarterback for the Patriots. Then he goes to the Niners and he wins 5 games. And then I remember he got hurt. And then it was all, well, I guess the 49ers made a huge mistake trading for this guy. And then he led the team all the way to the Super Bowl. And then last year they draft Trey Lance, and it's not Lance who leads the team to an NFC title game. It's Jimmy Garoppolo. However you feel about Jimmy Garoppolo right now might not be the way you feel about him in 4 to 5 years. And my guess is you'll feel very differently about him. Whether you love him right now, you might hate him. Whether you hate him, you might love him. Right now is not the finished story to what Jimmy Garoppolo is. His NFL career, I feel like, is far from over. And that's what's super interesting about this guy. He's done a lot in this league and nothing at all at the same time. There are very few players like this. Jimmy G has gone through it all at age 30. He's been the guy who was supposed to replace the guy. He's been given the gaudy contract and treated like he was the next coming. He's been to the Super Bowl and now he's the guy being replaced. It's all happened to him in 8 NFL seasons. I don't know what to think of him. Is he the luckiest player on the planet or the unluckiest? I don't know if I should feel bad for Jimmy Garoppolo. I just don't know how the rest of the league views Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, there's a reason the San Francisco 49ers are making him the highest paid backup quarterback in all of football. They view him as someone who should be traded for something valuable, although it feels like the rest of the league are not going to give anything valuable to get him. The book on him right now is he's never going to be your long-term quarterback, because I think from year to year he has been something completely different to what he has been the year before. That's the thing on him. He's never going to consistently be what you want him to be, but he can do some things that will surprise you. He'll lead a team to a Super Bowl. He'll lead a team to an NFC title game, no matter how big or small you thought he was a part of it. There is a part of me that really wanted him to be Tom Brady's replacement, because I do think a guy like that could have had success with the Patriots coach under Bill Belichick, who liked Jimmy Garoppolo a lot. If Bill Belichick thinks very highly of you as a player, I will think very highly of you as a player. I mean, Jimmy G has had the most success of any of the Brady backups. Brian Hoyer, Ryan Mallett, and Matt Castle. Like, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is way better than any of those players. I do think things would have ended up differently if he had stayed in New England. I think he would be more consistent. I think maybe he wouldn't have gone through as many injuries. I just think his play would have been more consistent, because he would have had Bill Belichick. He would have had Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator. I think the Patriots would be in a better place as well if they had kept Jimmy Garoppolo and made him the successor to Tom Brady. Here's a list of teams I think would be better right now if Jimmy Garoppolo were their starting quarterback. The Cleveland Browns are going to be without Deshaun Watson 12 games. Jimmy would help them keep afloat and possibly make the playoffs while Watson misses games. The Tennessee Titans, Jimmy Garoppolo is a better quarterback than Ryan Tannehill. Garoppolo elevates his game in the postseason, while Tannehill gets worse and shrinks in the biggest moments. The Carolina Panthers, Garoppolo is better than both Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. I'd also add the Giants, Seahawks, Washington, and the Falcons all have worse quarterbacks than Jimmy Garoppolo. The guy's not a top 10 quarterback, but he's top 20, and if on a loaded team, he might just bring them to a Super Bowl. I really hope Garoppolo ends up getting traded early on in the season. I think that's the best case scenario for the 49ers and for Trey Lance, for Jimmy Garoppolo not to be over his shoulder. I mean, no matter how you feel about Garoppolo as a player, you might think of him as totally average, but if the team is 0-4 and everyone is clamoring for him to play play instead of Trey Lance, that would be the absolute worst case scenario for the team, for Kyle Shanahan. That will be an absolute clown show if it plays out that way. You cannot have Jimmy Garoppolo be your team's backup quarterback. I don't think he's an elite player by any estimation. I just think he's way better than any backup quarterback. He's too good to be a backup quarterback. I don't think that very highly of the backup quarterback position. I think every team should have a starter who you should commit to playing 16 games, and your backup is only there if your starter gets hurt. There should never be a situation with any NFL team where in the back of your mind you're wondering, would this team win more games with their backup quarterback? And for Kyle Shanahan to call this situation a win-win is laughable. This is not a win-win. Nobody is winning in this situation. Jimmy Garoppolo is not getting what he wants. He wants to be the starter on another team. Kyle Shanahan is not getting what he wants. He has to continue to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, who he clearly doesn't want to coach anymore. And Trey Lance now has to live with the shadow of Jimmy Garoppolo, who is still on the team. This is a team with Super Bowl aspirations. This kind of stuff does not help these teams out in any way, shape, or form. They needed to resolve the situation, and they continue to just let it linger. Well, it's going to continue to linger as long as Jimmy Garoppolo is a member of the San Francisco 49ers. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.